Good morning. Thank you very much for having me here. It's been a little crazy, a 6:15 a.m. flight out from Tucson. I'm turning around today, but I appreciate you giving me the time here to talk about what I consider to be a very pressing educational issue, and that is ethnic studies. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about both the work that I've done in Tucson that I know very well, some of the work that my dear colleagues in San Francisco have done, and then also on a national level, what do the empirical results say about ethnic studies, and also what kind of lessons can be gleaned from the implementations both in Tucson and San Francisco. So there's the overview that I just gave, but I really like going back to the core of why ethnic studies in the first place. And the Berkeley ethnic studies professor, Ronald Takaki, gave a brilliant synopsis of why ethnic studies in the introduction to his book, A Different Mirror, where he said, "What happens, to borrow from the words of Adrian Rich, when someone with the authority of a teacher describes our society and you are not in it? Such an experience can be disorienting, a moment of psychic disequilibrium, like as if you looked into a mirror and saw nothing." And the idea behind ethnic studies is to provide different mirrors for our students so that they can actually see themselves in it. And in particular, in the Tucson context, because we have a very xenophobic context, it's not just seeing yourself, but seeing a positive image of yourself in that context. Because we have actually some very strong portrayals, they just have very strong negative portrayals of students. So when we go to Tucson, back in 1997, the Department of Hispanic Studies was formed, but at that time it was more of tutoring programs. It was very sort of reactive to the educational needs of the students. It was, there is a problem in our district, and let's try to figure out what we can do after the problem has already occurred. But by 2002, people said, why don't we actually try to create ethnic studies, implement ethnic studies, in particular Mexican American studies, because we are a border area, and focus on the lived experiences of our students. Our results really couldn't get any worse than they already are. Let's give it a shot. And so starting at one school and then eventually scaling up to 5, they both rolled out social studies and language arts, Mexican American studies, created to be 2-semester sequences that students would take over the course of the year that also counted as core graduation requirements. That is, you could take your history requirement as history of the U.S. Southwest from a Mexican American perspective. And at the same time, it was very strongly aligned to state standards. And I really can't stress that enough in both the Tucson and San Francisco area examples. Having high academic standards is absolutely critical, especially for the students who are performing the worst in the district. And the reason for that is we all know that when we have remedial courses, the kids implicitly know I'm in a dumb class. And this actually, in a weird way, can serve as remediation, but doesn't have to have a stigma associated with it. It can say, we have high academic standards, and we consider you to be scholars. We consider you to be critical thinkers within our area, and that's how we're going to move forward. Now, the one part about ethnic studies in Tucson that did make people feel uncomfortable, it explicitly centered inequality in the analysis and saying that, yes, there is inequality in our society, and you as students, you as young scholars are going to actually be part of the solution to that inequality. You're going to be ambassadors within your community to actually make our community better. And so with that, I was actually tasked by the special master on the Tucson Unified School District's desegregation plan to run a bunch of regression analyses to look at what's the unique relationship between Mexican American studies and educational achievement, very narrowly defined. And so we looked at, did the students pass their state standardized tests, and did they graduate? When controlling for all sorts of other areas, prior academic achievement, socioeconomic status, their race, if they were ELL, if they were talented and gifted, et cetera, et cetera. And after controlling for all of these different factors, we found a consistent, positive, and significant relationship between taking Mexican American studies and student achievement. And that was for all of them, for the Ames test, for writing, for reading, and yes, even in mathematics, which was really surprising for us because we didn't actually have a mathematics, like a Chicano math course. It didn't exist. But what it does start to speak to is that the students were changing their relationship to school. They started to see themselves as actually academically oriented people. And so also with that, while one class was important, we actually found that taking multiple classes increased the likelihood of all of these outcomes occurring. So you take 2 classes, 3 classes, 4 classes, you're actually more likely to graduate than just taking one. So then over to the example in San Francisco. Back in 2007, 2008, they ran a pilot program in San Francisco and trying to implement ethnic studies, and then expanded it to 5 schools in the from 2010 to 2013. And what they did is they specifically identified students who either had in 8th grade a low GPA, lower than 2.0, and or had, I believe it was lower than 85% attendance rate at school. So students who were sort of labeled at risk and really intentionally trying to target them in that process. Oops, I'm sorry, actually, let me back up really quick. I forgot one really important thing. The students who took Mexican American Studies had in Tucson, had some of the lowest academic achievement of any students in the district their freshman year. Their sophomore year, it actually significantly went down. They were able to take Mexican American Studies their junior and senior year, and by the time that they graduated, they actually had the highest graduation rates of any group in the entire district. And so we're actually seeing very similar things in San Francisco. So they take they intentionally targeted what would be considered low-performing students. And what did they find in relationship to very similarly situated students throughout the district who weren't able to take these ethnic studies courses their freshman year? Well, they were actually incredibly robust findings that came out of Stanford University. Attendance went up 21 percentage points, which, I mean, that's huge in and of itself, because we know our students, it's difficult for students to learn in school if they're not actually there. Their GPAs went up 1.4 grade points, and they earned 23 more credits. And so, these are absolutely dramatic results about the way that ethnic studies can actually change students' orientation to school and subsequently their achievement within school. On a national level, the Professor Emeritus Christine Sleeter did a review of the results from ethnic studies, because really we've only been talking very narrowly about grades, attendance, graduation, and passing standardized tests. And those are important, but she actually argues that in her review of the literature, that the effects are a lot larger than that. That is, that ethnic studies can create a very strong positive identity, and in particular a strong positive identity in relationship to academics. That is, students start to see themselves as, I can actually do math because I see myself in math. I can see myself, the relevance of science to my community, so I see myself as a scientist. And also so what ends up happening is that there isn't just cognitive gains, but there are also social gains. Students develop a sense of agency and these larger, what we call democratic outcomes. But what she was very clear about in her review, was that this only comes from ethnic studies programs that reflect the culture and orientation of the students who it's serving, or at least the geographic area that they're in. There's a certain amount of relevance to it, and it centers in equality. Because not every ethnic studies approach is equally created, and unfortunately a lot of people, when they hear ethnic studies, start going to a Heroes and Holidays, Foods and Fiestas. We're going to celebrate Cinco de Mayo, and no, it's not Mexican Independence Day. It's and learn about that, and cool, we've done ethnic studies. No, it's a deep critical analysis of inequality, the consequences, causes of it, and more importantly, what we can do about it. And when it's sort of these haphazard methods of Heroes and Holidays, it simply doesn't work. So the results are not uniform, but a lot of the non-uniformity is about a difference in implementation. So overall, in terms of the very narrowly defined academic outcomes, the biggest impacts actually we've shown to occur for the lowest performing students. And this makes sense because you're not going to see the impact of a course through multivariate regression analyses if students come in with 3.9 grade point averages. They're already going to graduate. The impact of the course is negligible. But for the students who are the lowest performing, ethnic studies offers an incredibly promising approach to educating these students who in many respects don't feel part of this educational community in their schools. But above and beyond that, there are a number of non-cognitive results that I think are incredibly important as well, because as we're going into an increasingly multicultural society, it's incredibly important that we learn to it's sort of Pollyanna-ish, but we need to learn to get along across difference. And in many respects, what the results from ethnic studies indicate is that the stronger sense of self that students have, the better they are able to navigate across difference. I know that sounds kind of counterintuitive, but when I have a stronger sense of self, it actually allows me to better get along with other people who are different than me. And a lot of the fighting that we see stems from insecurities and an undeveloped sense of self. That's not the only reason, but there's a lot of different things that play there. But at the same time, we have to be very clear about how we implement ethnic studies. It needs to center inequality, and it needs to center issues of race and racism. At the same time, reflect the students' lived realities, and I can't stress this enough, have high academic standards. Absolutely, there's this knock against ethnic studies that it's something like basket weaving. It's the kids who can't hack it. By the way, if you've ever done basket weaving, that's really hard to do. That's, I know I shouldn't joke, but it really is. But the point being that it needs to be academically rigorous, challenge the students, because they can't afford to be bored. There's not time to be bored. We have to challenge them and say, no, you are using your education to better your community in the process. Each one of the projects that was reviewed started out as some sort of an intentional pilot and was then scaled up, structured and institutionalized. We really haven't found just one class over here and one class over there having any meaningful impact. It needs that there needs to be a large level of coordination. And also, when we can do them as more than just one course, or if we can do them as 2 course sequences, that's when the real effects start happening. And more than just electives, they need, especially the lesson from Tucson, they needed to count as core requirements. They needed for students to be able to say, this actually counts for my core, as a core component of me advancing to graduation. And so ultimately, sort of what I see in this situation is that if justice and equity is a core component of public education, then ethnic studies represents what should be a core component of that moving ahead. So thank you very much for your time, and I welcome any questions.
Okay, thank you so much. Questions? Mr. Northey.
Hi, that's really amazing work that you're doing. There's a lot of literature out on grit and resilience, yes. And I'm wondering, your work seems to imply that, and I think this is where I'm going with this, but that really the focus should be on making the student the center of the education, as opposed to marginalizing him and then removing his culture from his education. He's going to be a stronger citizen, and he's going to be able to basically go through and be successful. Yes. And it's not necessarily the grit or resilience that he needs to be taught. Would that be correct?
I'm going to do a quick plug. The only reason why you need to be gritty is if your environment's toxic in the first place. Mm-hmm. And I also don't have a lot of patience for. This is just an academic beef that I've had for a while, that I don't have a lot of patience for grit because it ignores the larger social structures in place. And in many respects, what ethnic studies does is it centers the student, and it centers creating a positive sense of self, but understanding that there are larger social structures in place of inequality, and centering that in the analysis, and then challenging the students. It becomes sort of this iterative process. You are within this inequitable social structure. What are you going to do about it? And by being involved in that, it becomes a cycle of creating a stronger positive sense of self in that way. And so because they're more engaged, it challenges them to be engaged, and they have to do it. They don't really know how, but by doing it, they end up developing a sense of agency in the process. So it becomes a way of, instead of individualizing it, to looking at it more holistically and more on a systems level, but still having students there and students at the core and at the center, and saying their individual identity development is very important in that process.
From my perspective, there's not a lot in California on ethnic studies, at least in the K-12 world, yes. Other than SFUSD. I'm wondering what's getting in the way. What's going to be the big challenge in California?
There's a ton of challenges. First of all, there's always an institutional inertia. We've been doing things the same way for so long. We're going to continue doing them the same way. There's also an issue of people misunderstand what ethnic studies is. And in many respects, ethnic studies kind of becomes this boogeyman of, creating ethnic balkanization and doing all this stuff. And the problem is that the monoculturalism embedded within the traditional curricula doesn't do anything at actually examining our differences. It actually, in many respects, drives us farther apart because it doesn't acknowledge our differences. And so what ends up happening, though, is that, okay, we identify a problem and then we need to move to a solution. And it's like, well, and there's a lot of resistance in that process because, it's sort of like the bad that I know is better than the bad that I don't know. And what's going on slowly is that as ethnic studies has popped up across the country, that people have taken to doing rigorous empirical research on it. And little by little, it's becoming less and less the boogeyman and actually more and more like sort of curricular and pedagogical approaches that we need to be able to adopt on a larger level. And so it's sort of like this larger iterative process where, basically demystifying what ethnic studies is, working against institutional inertia, being able to create collaborations to really advocate and say that this is a very important curricular approach. And it needs to be something that's not just sort of a convenient add-on that, if we have time, it's like, no, ethnic studies needs to be at the core of our multicultural reality. That's where we need to move, at least discursively.
Thank you.
Mr. Zimmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for this presentation and also for all of the work in Arizona. Not only all of the, not only on ethnic studies, but also the work on behalf of the immigrant rights movement. A decade, more than 2 decades ago, Los Angeles was the epicenter of the struggle, and I know that struggle has moved in large part to Arizona, and we appreciate the work on the front lines. I also want to thank you for your comments about grit and resiliency and how that such mindsets are often taught in opposition to one's community and family, and it's very important to hear a scholar say that out loud in this boardroom. I'm very troubled by the how universal that perspective is, continues to be pervasive in our system without any critical thought about who talks to which students about whose family and whose community. Yep. And I appreciate your comments. I'd like to ask you about 2 things. One is the question of velocity. And there are many of us who are extremely impatient, who have long believed that this should be our approach to teaching, period, and are very impatient about implementation. As a scholar who has studied this, you've also seen some of the hazards of rapid implementation without a lot of periphery vision, if you will, of what needs to be involved to be most effective. So if you could address that issue of velocity, and then I have one more quick question as a follow-up.
Absolutely. So that is a huge tension, because the ethnic studies program in Tucson was eliminated, but then through the federal desegregation plan, it's being brought back, but it was actually meant to be expanded, and so now we're dealing with exactly that same issue. And so from Tucson, it's a yes and. On the one hand, there are some people who are opponents of ethnic studies who just want to talk it to death. That we need to figure out a good plan, and a good plan. Don't get me wrong, a good plan is critically important, but we talk ourselves to death and we don't make any headway. But to balance that out, at the same time, the results that we've shown from both San Francisco and Tucson, as well as the national review that Dr. Sleeter did, those were the results of years and years and years of talented teachers building up their skills pedagogically as well as curricularly, and staying at the cutting edge of that work, knowing the community and working with the families and having those connections, and that's where we see this. So, in terms of how we're rolling it out now, it's only been a couple of years of implementation. We don't come anywhere near to those results, and it's not because we have uncaring teachers. It's that we don't have them at the critical mass that we had before. Right. And so, it needs to be that a very delicate balance where we need to be pushing ahead, but if we move too quickly, we're going to fall on our face. And we need to treat it as a new skill that our teachers are learning. That is, that you can't just say ethnic studies, at least the example in Tucson, you couldn't just say, okay, I read some books by Maya Angelou and now I'm going to teach ethnic studies. Right. It doesn't work. It's an entire relationship between the teacher, the student, and the community as within this larger curricular design, and it takes a lot of skill to do it. It's like I couldn't graduate as an English major and go say I'm going to teach high school physics. It would be asinine to say something like that. And we need to treat ethnic studies as a skill like that. That is a skill that our teachers who are already qualified to do it can learn, but we can't a priori assume that they already have those capabilities in place to be able to do it.
So I appreciate that response. My follow-up is kind of related to this. I want to add to this kind of heroes and holidays don't work. And I want to say something that I'm almost a little bit uncomfortable myself saying. But I think it's an important part of this conversation. It may be. I also think that just the teaching of social movements doesn't work. And I know that there's a lot of temptation, especially those of us who may have been part of those movements and know that they have not been taught. But it seems that when you're talking about the rigor involved, and you're talking about the entire mindset and the relationships, then in many ways it's also we're teaching or we are lensing through critical race theory, and so to get to that constant point of professional collaboration and ongoing, reflection process for the instructors. What type of investments do you recommend in terms of really getting to that level of rigor that kind of transcends what the actual? I mean, I'm not saying that the actual subject matter is not important, but I think you're talking about something much deeper. Absolutely. And so my question is, what resources for instructors do we need to get to that deep level?
I got you. So within the Tucson Unified School District, first of all, we put on an annual institute and invite teachers as part of their professional development training to be able to learn about this as both a pedagogical and curricular approach. And that was kind of what I conceived of as like Ethnic Studies 101. It's sort of getting their foot in the door and getting them engaged in it. And then above and beyond that, there needed to be continual training, whether it was coming through the University of Arizona, through Pima Community College, whether it was through some of the private entities that are really good at doing this kind of teacher training. And then the other component of it that was really big and why it's so important to have clusters of these teachers together is because they can actually help build off of each other. If you're that one solo status person, you don't have a lot of checks and balances. You don't have someone to say you're doing really well here but not really well there. And we see that in other departments where people can help support each other like that. And that's one of the difficulties and liabilities of having ethnic studies be sort of like this one teacher standalone off on their own, is that they almost become in a state of arrested development. They aren't able to continue to develop and become a better teacher in the process. And so there needs to be, multiple people. As a matter of fact, they would actually do some team teaching. I'm sorry, I'm not saying this right. They would pair off teachers. So you could have students who would take their language arts with this teacher and their social studies with this teacher, and then they would take that over the course of the year. And then there would be this really nice relationship being built so that they could actually, A, serve the needs of the students, B, have conversations with each other on a consistent basis and really both build off of each other to best serve the needs of the students, but also serve as that balancing point for each other. So there's a number of different ways that you can structure it. But really, like I said, what kills it is the isolation. The collectivity and being able to learn from each other really helps continue to advance it.
How y'all doing? My name is Jose Lara. I'm the coordinator for the Ethnic Studies Now Coalition, and also a board of directors for the United Teachers Los Angeles, and a board member myself in the El Rancho Unified School District. I'm here today to talk to you about ethnic studies. I'm glad that Dr. Cabrera was here to give a presentation. He's a colleague of mine actually at UCLA. We went to UCLA during the same time, and I'm really glad that he's continuing the work. We're both continuing the work in bringing culturally relevant critical pedagogy to our students. One thing I'll be remiss with be coming up here and telling you that one of the things that Dr. Cabrera said that I don't agree with was that we do have many educators ready to go in LA Unified to implement ethnic studies. We have a cadre of educators doing the good work at Roosevelt, at the Cesar Chavez Learning Academy, at Monroe, at Santee, at Maya Angelou, at LAUSD, at various school sites that are already doing a lot of great work. As a matter of fact, the Office of Curriculum Instruction brought a lot of those educators together to revise a lot of the curriculum, a lot of the syllabuses that are before you. Second of all is UCLA. Speaking of UCLA, their current teacher education program has an emphasis on ethnic studies this year, and they did that specifically because LAUSD was moving in the direction of implementing ethnic studies as a core class for graduation in our district. We have a historic precedent today in our district now to move and lead in ethnic studies and culturally relevant pedagogy inside of our district. What does ethnic studies look like at elementary school level? You can look at your AMP program, an excellent program that presented today. What does it look like? That's what it looks like. It's amazing. We do need K through 12 ethnic studies, but you know what we need? We need an actual plan that's done with the Ethnic Studies Committee to put a plan with specific dates that puts us on a roadmap to rolling this out district-wide, and that's not what we have not received yet. The Ethnic Studies Committee that was talked about by Dr. Chow has not been reinstituted. They have not met. I'm not sure if we should be meeting without the district, but that would just be silliness. We need to work with the district, work with the Office of Instruction to reinstitute the committee so we can come back with a good report to the board of a great process for implementation with specific dates and budget numbers attached to that, right? Because we are in budget season. So how much money are we going to allocate towards ethnic studies for next school year? Some of those questions on 40 schools, which schools? How many sections are these schools? That's important information that we need to know. We do know this. We do know that there's a lot of will amongst you fellow board members as conversations that we've had, and the fact that the original resolution passed by overwhelming numbers. We do know there's a tremendous community support about this. And lastly, we do know that there's an ethnic studies movement going across the state of California right now. El Rancho, we have it as a graduation requirement in our district. There's many other districts going in the same direction. Fontana Unified, we're doing a presentation on next week where they want to implement it as a graduation requirement. So please, let's continue the movement for ethnic studies and critical pedagogy. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to end our meeting with Dr. Gibson and updates.
So we feel energy and passion in the room today as we think about putting all of our students at the center in a culturally relevant and responsive way. We want to celebrate our teachers as this is Teacher Appreciation Day. And I also want to mark that while some of us in the room might not have a credential, we are all teachers. Everybody is watching us, learning from us, and leading with us. So I want to say thank you to all of our teachers in the room, both credentialed and those who might be coming forward with a credential to help us with the future teacher shortage. As we think about the updates at the district, I want to remind you that also online and also in your resources, we've identified opportunities for continual learning, lifelong learning as educators together. And each week we will be featuring different teachers that illuminate some of the best of what is happening in LA Unified School District. I want to thank all of our partners for coming together today to share a piece of the story. We know that there is much more data behind all of these stories and much more data to come around the successes that are taking place in Los Angeles Unified School District. And we just want to say again, thank you from the Division of Instruction. Today is a window into a world that we will continue to develop together. Thank you and happy Teacher Appreciation Day.
And I would like to thank all panel members for staying with us and being involved, and also to Dr. Cabrera for your trip here. We appreciate that very much. Thank you, sir.
I have a couple of comments, if I may. I was not persuaded, but stimulated by Mr. Lara's comments regarding where we are with the concept of ethnic studies. I'd like to make a request of Mr. Chow that the definition you read of ethnic studies be provided. I was looking for it in here, but I didn't see it. Secondly, a comment was made by Yolanda Morgan. She talked about we should set higher standards. Higher standards require greater support. When you raise the bar, and I've given this example before, when you raise the bar in a high jump, back in my day, you landed on sawdust. So the higher you jumped, the more you got hurt when you came down. Same thing with the pole vault. So unless you put a mat as a support system under a high jumper or a pole vaulter, you're looking for injuries. Are we providing sufficient support? Now, when Dr. Gibson talked about a future teacher shortage, we should have future teacher clubs on all of our middle school and high school campuses. It doesn't have to be a class, but it could be a club with some incentive, like there's a football team or a band or something that incentivizes teachers to start a future teachers club and give students the joy of teaching, so pardon me, they don't stumble into it or happen to be a teacher while I'm trying to be discovered by Hollywood or something like that. It may sound facetious, but we really want people who want to be teachers to become teachers. And we as a profession, I think, are remiss. I'm not blaming anybody, but I am holding us accountable when we talk about we're going to provide the greatest leaders in the world, and we're going to make something out of you. And we look at the students. How many of us say we're going to make a teacher out of you? Not you became a teacher because you couldn't be something else. That's that old adage of those that can't do teach. And that's ridiculous. Teachers do too many things that change the world and save our communities on a daily basis. Now, this thing about ethnic studies, I know we're still not clear. And I believe it because I'm not real clear. Do we all have a clear definition of what ethnic studies really means when it's implemented? Not how it feels, not whether we feel better because we learn more about our people and other people's people. What does it look like in implementation? There are probably variations on a theme. I got that. I don't have to be monolithic in this. But I still think we're not there yet. And what resources are we willing to put into it? Should all schools do it simultaneously? Should it be an elective? Should it be a full semester, full year? I was looking at the Tucson thing, juniors and seniors getting a full year course. That's 4 semesters, sounding like to me. What can we afford? What can we not afford? What can we afford not to do it? Is ethnic studies a way of feeling better about yourself, or is it a way of understanding the true creation of the world that we live in, how it was created, how it was developed, and how that prepares us for the future? We can't go back and change the past, but it can inform us of what is being prepared for us as we sit at the table of lacking what we call resources and maybe even beliefs. And I continue to get troubled by politics in this country, and I'm not able to affect the politics. Best I could do was say every student should be able to vote when they graduate, so we have prepared that resolution and passed it. But people who are running almost anti the concept of ethnic inclusion, the concept of the celebration of ethnic contributions, and being celebrated for it, and saying things that others in this wonderful country, my country 'tis of thee, would love to say themselves, but they can't, so now they have somebody espousing with all of the bombast, and I won't use any other words because I might become that, that says there's some people that should be kept over here and others kept over there, and I know what that feels like because I rode in the back of a bus for the first 20 years of my life in New Orleans, Louisiana. So I really am hopeful that we continue to meet and the committee meets so that we hear the voices about what this looks like. And I think there'll have to be people who specialize in this informing us of the literature that needs to be a part of our reading and our distribution of those readings to our students, and particularly to our teachers. Because a lot of people who say, I know ethnic studies because I am ethnic. That's not like saying, black is a color. Black is not a color. It's not a complexion. It's a culture. If you look at me, you don't know what color I am and what culture I have to open my mouth. So it's not my complexion that makes me black. It's something else, and it's more than I want to talk about here. So I'm still trying to learn about my own ethnic heritage. I've complained openly that when I was in school, in segregated schools in New Orleans, one of the songs that they taught us to sing, these are only black kids, we sang Dixie. I wish I was in the land of cotton, old times there are not forgotten. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. And the rest of it about celebrating Dixie. And now you wave a flag about Dixieland and people want to take it down. They should take it down. And I should have never learned Dixie. And some of the people still don't learn the words of the Negro National Anthem. Lift every voice and sing. I go to public gatherings of learned people who need the program to read the words while they sing the song. And sometimes don't know what the tune is. They wait for the singer to sing it. Can only sing one verse, one stanza. That's part of ethnic studies too. What did you learn about yourself? If you can't learn about yourself, what can you teach to other people? And if you only know about yourself, you're still minimalized because there's too much other stuff to learn about other people because they were here first. And who was first? I don't know who was first. I mean, you can lie about it and fabricate it and tell his story instead of history. It doesn't matter who was here first. What does matter is we're here now, and how do we make this thing work so that we're proud of everybody and everybody who did something to bring us together so that we're here in the present. Can't change the past. Can study it so that it informs the future. That's my little 2 cents, but I hope that the ethnic studies thing is more than just a slogan, like all children can learn, or, liberty and justice for all, or education is a civil right. I put that out there too, and some people still don't know what that means. I just hope, and I will remain optimistic, that while we have the opportunity now, as Mr. Lara said, and somebody else said it, this is a propitious moment because we have the chance now to show that we're serious about this belief in the ethnic heritage of others being a part of all of our learning. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
This meeting is adjourned. It's 12:17 p.m. Thank you.